Okay, this is Carol Merritt on March the 21st, 2006 in Atlanta, talking with the Reverend Willie Bolden here at his home on Emily Way. Good morning, Reverend
Good morning,
Bolden.
Carol. How are you?
I'm fine, and
Great.
thank you so much for having this interview with me for Voices Across the Color Line.
Well, thank you for considering me.
Okay, no,
Okay.
you're an important voice from the movement. What I'd like to start off doing, though, is you telling me something about your background,
Okay.
where you were born, who your parents were,
Okay.
starting out growing up.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was actually born in Sumter, South Carolina on December the 7th, 1938. I'm told by my parents that my mother and father moved to Savannah, Georgia. I was about 3 years old at the time. So I was actually raised and educated in Savannah. My father worked at the Southern Cotton Oil Mill there in Savannah.
What was your father's name?
Charles Bolden.
Okay.
And he worked there for over almost 50-some years.
Doing what?
He was a machinist. And he was very good at that. I don't know where he got his training from because he quit school in 6th grade. He was the oldest of 14. So he had to stop school and help his mom take care of his siblings. But I lived long enough to know, and he did too, to actually see him in motion, actually on the job there at the Southern Cotton Oil Company. They made Scoco lard and Western oil and that kind of thing. Okay. And he was so good at it until when it would get cold and the pipelines would freeze. No matter what time of night or morning it was, they would call my dad. Because my dad was the one who could go in there and mess around with those machines, and I certainly didn't know what he did, but whatever it was, it worked, and it would unthaw those lines, and those lines would allow the oil and whatever other materials to come through. But not only did he do that, he delivered the morning news, the Savannah Morning News, about 1,500 papers every morning. And I often wondered why he worked 2 jobs. And when I reached my 7th birthday, I found out because I had to get up in the morning and go with him to deliver those papers and then come back and go to bed. And then my mom would get me up to go to school. But I found out the reason he did that was because most of the women in the neighborhood where I lived, which were row houses, worked in the white folk kitchen or in their homes. They were maids and that kind of thing. And his position was if my mom was going to take care of anybody's children or child, it was going to be me. I was an only child. So if he had to work 2 jobs to make sure that she stayed home to take care of me, so be it. And that's what he did. He did not allow her to go outside the house to work. Later I found out after I got maybe about middle school, she kept complaining to him about wanting to do something. So he sent her to beauty culture school, and I have a picture on my mantelpiece in there of my mother graduating from cosmetology school. And then he built, or had built, a salon onto the house so she could stay right there and work. As a matter of fact, I started working in the salon as a shampooer the older I got. And the ladies used to love for me to wash their hair, you know. But my dad was one who believed in taking care of his family and working. And that's where I got my work ethics from. my dad taught me about work. I have, with the exception of about 3 months when I came back from Boston, Boston, Massachusetts, I have always had a job. My dad, when I delivered those papers, he would be on one side of the street, I would be on the other side of the street. On Saturday morning, when we got ready to go collect, he would be on one side of the street, I would be on one side of the street. We would come back home, we would sit down to the table, I would count my money, he would count his money, he would separate what he was to give to the newspaper company, he kept his, and he gave me my allowance. So my wife wondered now why I'm such a sticker about time, because my dad was a sticker about time. He did not believe in doing anything late. He said, I'm not going to be late going to church. I'm not late going to work. I'm not going to be late going to church. If they had a church meeting, I'm not going to be late going to work. I'm not going to be late going to my meetings. So I would leave an hour earlier to get someplace and be there 30 or 40 minutes earlier than to be 1 minute late. That's just me, and I was always that way. My mom was a bit more educated. She finished high school, and I believe she told me
In
back
Sumter?
then, yeah, and in Sumter, South Carolina. And I believe back then, when you finished, I think she said 10th or 11th grade, that was high school. So she finished high school, and she was a go-getter. She did not believe in segregation. She would fight segregation, and she taught me to fight segregation. I think that's really where I got my fight, to fight injustice, because my mom was like that. On the street we lived on, which was West Anderson Street, it ran into Highway 17, which took you to Florida. And it would bring you back, and you would come right by our house, and it would take you to the Talmadge Bridge, which would take you over into South Carolina. Well, I went to the middle school. It was Cuyler Junior High School.
Was it C-U-Y-L-E-R?
C-U-Y-L-E-R.
Okay.
In Savannah. And it was right across the street from my house. And those trucks, back then, you know, schools were not air conditioned, so the windows were up during the summer. And when the trucks came by, you had to really the teacher had to actually stop teaching because of the loudness of those transfer trucks. And sometimes they come through and blow their horns and all that stuff.
What neighborhood was this?
This was called the West Side.
West Side.
West Side.
Okay.
And my mom, who was president of PTA, believe it or not, she was president of PTA in my elementary school, which was Florence Elementary School. And when she went over, when I was promoted to junior high, they voted her president of the junior high. And she served as president of both the elementary and the junior high because the elementary folk didn't want her to quit. They wouldn't elect anybody else.
What was her name?
My mother's name was Mrs. Sadie Mae Bolden.
What was her?
I also have a picture of her in there on my mantelpiece.
What's her maiden name?
Williams. Her
Sadie
maiden name
Mae
was
Williams.
Williams.
Okay.
Yeah. And she was a go-getter, and I remembered her arguing about these trucks at PTA meetings because she would have me with her. And the people would say, oh yeah, they'd be jumping up and down. That's right, Miss Bolden, that's right. We need to do something, we need to do something. And she said, we need to go down to City Hall, we need to tell them. And they said, that's right, Miss Bolden, that's right, Miss Bolden. And when she got ready to go down there, it wasn't nobody but her. All the folk who were jumping up and down, they vanished. But did that stop her? She would go right on down to the city council meeting, and she would fuss and rage. I mean, she would just tell them off. And eventually, it took I remember about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. But you know what they did? They rerouted those trucks around from College Junior High School, going in another direction. And of course, you know, everybody said, oh yeah, we did it. My mom said, yeah, we sure did, we sure did. But she was a go-getter. She believed in education long before the United Negro College Fund came up with the slogan, "A mind is a terrible thing to waste." I used to hear my mom say that all the time. I mean, when I was 4 or 5 years old, she would say, "A mind is a terrible thing to waste." So she believed in education. But I grew up there, and my mom and my dad were my best friends. I'm an only child, and they were my best friends. And even today, sometime around Mother's Day and Father's Day, you know, I get a little in the dumps. And she's been dead since 1975, and my dad since 1982. But I can still feel their presence, especially when I'm going through something. They still guide and protect me.
What was your church?
The church I grew up in?
Yeah.
I grew up in a Methodist church, St. Philip AME Church, the oldest Methodist church in Savannah on West Broad Street. My mother was an usher. My dad was a steward and became the chairman of the steward board. And he was also president of the usher board. And that picture you see behind me is a picture that they gave to him and presented to him, I believe it's in 1957, something of that nature. But that he's in his usher's uniform right there.
Okay.
So I grew up in the Methodist church, even though now I am Baptist. And basically Baptist because my wife is Baptist. She's from Mississippi. She grew up in the Baptist church.
And her name?
Her name is Georgiana D. Bolden. Her maiden name was Dean. We've been married. This coming July will be 35 years. And she was not going to change from Baptist. So my mom and dad always said to me that a family that prays together stays together. So I figured if she wasn't going to change, then I changed.
Okay.
And I have not regretted it one bit. So now I'm Baptist.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I'm a Baptist minister. I pastor the Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church in Cedartown, Georgia.
I see.
And this coming September will be my 11th year there.
Okay. So when did you choose the ministry?
Well, I don't know if I chose it. I
It
think
chose you.
it chose me.
Okay.
Because, believe it or not, I had planned on going out. It happened on a New Year's night, around 1986, 85, 86. And my plan was to go out. As a matter of fact, I had already gone to the club, which was Lee John's on DeLoe Drive in Atlanta. And I had picked out my table, and I had gotten all of my refreshments for my friends who were going to join me. And the food, I had ordered the food that I wanted for my table and everything. And my wife was one who always believed in going to church. So we were going to go to...
Do you need to answer that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were at Lee John's.
I was I had planned to go there that night. I was going to go with my wife to church to watch the night service.
Okay.
And then I was going to ask her to... She wasn't much at going to clubs like I did at that time. But I was going to ask her to go, and I knew she would. Even though she wouldn't drink anything, she would just be there with me. And we were going to go to the club that night. And while at watch night service, I heard the message, and something came over me. I have no idea what it was. I had started going to church pretty regularly, and even older members of the church were saying that, boy, because I do a lot of speaking around there. Boy, you're going to be a preacher. You're going to be, don't come in with that. Not me. But, and I can't even until today explain exactly what it was that came over me. But I can't really explain what it was that came over me, but it was a feeling that I had never had before. I do know that. And when he finished preaching, it was getting close to midnight, and he had everybody to come up to the altar. And we had those little candles lit. They had the lights turned out. And he started praying. And all of a sudden, I just started crying. I don't know why. I just started crying. I mean, boo-hooing. And my wife was holding me, and whoever it was standing on the other side, they were holding me, and we just crying. And finally, he finished, and I went outside. And that following Sunday, I wouldn't go to the club that night. I just told my wife, I said, I made these reservations for us at Lee John's. I've already paid for everything, but I'm not going. I called Lee John, and I told her to tell the folk who were at my table, look, have fun. Everything is paid for. Don't worry about it. But something came up, and I won't be able to make it. I didn't even tell them what had happened. I just said I won't be able to get there, and I didn't. And the following Sunday, during that week, something just kept telling me to go talk to my pastor. And I went and I talked to him, and I told him what was happening. And he said, well, what do you think it is? I said, I don't know, Pastor. I really don't know what it is. I feel like the Lord is speaking to me. But what he's saying, I don't know. I'm not quite sure. So he said, well, just let's talk next week. Or in the middle of the week, if you feel like you want to talk to me or something has happened, give me a call and we'll get together. I said, okay. So by midway the next week, I just started reading the Bible and thinking and asking God, what is it? What is it that you want me to do? And I got the feeling that he's saying, I have given you certain gifts, and you have not been using them. And you remember the story about the gifts? One with one, one with five, one with 10. You've taken yours and you have pretty much buried it in the sand. Mm-hmm. So you need to do something with what I've given you. And I got the feeling that maybe he was calling me to use my gift of persuasion and to preach. Because I've always had the ability to persuade people, even as a kid coming up. I was a leader in school, on the corner. I was a leader. Folk would follow me. I had an act of getting people to follow me. So I went and I told my pastor, I thought maybe that's what it was. And he said, I was going to let you make that decision. I knew it all along. But I didn't want to say it to you. I wanted you to find out for yourself. And from that point on, things just began to escalate.
And what year was that?
That was around 1980. Let me see, he ordained me as a deacon in 88. And I was, 86. And then I was licensed to preach in 87 and ordained in 88. And this is my first pastorate. But I became his assistant immediately after he He licensed me. And there were,
And
he
what
had about
church?
7 or 8, Bethlehem, the Bethlehem
Okay.
Missionary Baptist
Okay.
Church,
Mm-hmm.
over on Hogan Road. Dr. Carl Henry Moncrief Sr. Is the senior pastor there, even today.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when you, years before, it must not have been any accident that you would end up with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference then.
Well, I had no idea that I would ever get involved with SCLC. Really didn't know what SCLC was and what they were doing. Had heard about Dr. King, but didn't really follow him. As a matter of fact, I was in Savannah. I was the assistant bell captain at one of the 2 plush hotels downtown,
The Manger?
which was the Manger
Manger.
Hotel.
Okay.
And it was right across the street from a park. And every day around noon, Jose would come with his people. He would lead a march every day.
When was this? What year?
This was, now we're talking about, let me see, I came to Atlanta, this had to be around 1960.
Or 63 maybe?
Around 60.
60?
61,
Okay.
because he and I both and all came to Atlanta in 61.
Oh, okay.
From Savannah. So this had to be around 1960.
Okay.
And he would bring these folk downtown, and he would march them over to the park, and there was an Indian chief, that statue is still there, called Tommy Chichi.
Oh.
And Jose would climb up on top of Tommy Chichi. Mm-hmm. And he would talk about segregation and white folks like nobody I have ever seen or heard. And I said, this man got to be crazy. Standing up on the Indian chief in downtown Savannah, talking about white folk the way he's talking about. He's got to be out of his mind. And I would stand over at the hotel outside, and I could literally see him up there doing this stuff. And I said, this guy. So to make a long story short, I finally found out that they were going to try to integrate the hotel where I was working. And every day when they came down, it was my job to make sure that the doors were locked. And I did
Because of the demonstration?
Because of the demonstration.
Okay.
After the demonstrators leave, I unlock the doors. Okay. If customers came, you unlock it, let them in, but you lock it back. So I found out that they were coming to integrate the hotel. So I developed a case of amnesia. And
had you talked with Hosea by then?
No.
Y'all hadn't communicated?
I hadn't communicated. Not then. We hadn't communicated. So I decided that I was going to develop amnesia and leave the doors unlocked and let them come in. Ben Clark, I'll never forget it. I could see the day like it's happening right now. It was Ben Clark, Juanita Williams, who was Jose Williams' wife, Henry Brownlee, and there were 2 other people whose name I can't remember. But they came in. And of course they would not leave. They asked them to leave, and then they sat down on the floor. You know, that was our way of demonstrating nonviolently, and they were drug off to jail. And the innkeeper called me and asked me what happened. I said, I really don't know. He said, well, that's good. You fired. Fired me. So I said, no, that must have. So
you knew that was going to happen?
I kind of figured something would happen, but I didn't know whether or not I would be fired. I didn't think he would go that far. Mm-hmm. You know, I thought he'd probably suspend me a couple of days or a week or 2, you know, and then give that responsibility. I thought he would probably get on the senior bell captain more so than me, you know, even though the senior bell captain had given me that assignment, who also was black. But it didn't happen that way. They fired me. Best thing that ever happened to me was to get fired from that job. I didn't know it at the time. And of course later, I met Dr. King and through Jose.
That was a good job.
Huh?
That was a good job.
What, at
As
the hotel?
assistant, as the assistant bellhop.
Oh yes, oh yeah. I mean, I came in contact with some of the top people who would come there. There were Millsby Lane. That was one of his favorite hotels, and I mean, he would even ask for me when he came in. And I had money every day. You made money every day.
Mostly from the tips.
Mostly from the tips. Of course, we were on salary too.
Okay.
But you got most of your money on tips. And then, as an assistant bell captain, you did certain things for the big tippers. You made sure that their room had what they needed, or whatever they needed or wanted. You made sure they got it. Because the captain and the bell captain was in the know. And it's like that even today in hotels. Your maitre d' and your lead bellman, they know what's going on. They can get whatever the customer needs. And of course we could do it and did it back then. So I had money every day. It wasn't like, the day you don't have something, you have a little bit today and none tomorrow. You had to wait until the end of the week to get paid. Had money every day.
You were only about in your 20s then.
Oh yeah, because when I went to Washington in 1964, I was 24 years old, fresh out of jail in Savannah. When I went to the March on Washington. So I worked there. I met. Jose told me when I met Dr. King, he and I had a little confrontation in the pool room, and then when Jose told me that Dr. King wanted me to come to Atlanta to interview, to work with him, I said, he want me? I said, Jose, did you tell Dr. King that I am not nonviolent? Did you tell him if somebody slap me, if they have a face after they do it, it's going to be a miracle? If somebody spit in my face, the way you tell me all of these things are happening, that whatever lips spit on me, I was going to try to knock them off. He said, no, I didn't tell him. You tell him. I said, oh, yeah, okay. So I came on to Atlanta and interviewed with Dr. King at 334 Auburn Avenue. And it was 3 years before I went back to Savannah.
I want to hear about the confrontation that you had with him in the pool room.
Well, I was in the pool room playing 9-ball. And
Where?
In Savannah.
Where in Savannah?
It was called Charlie Brown's Pool Room on West Broad Street. It is now Martin Luther King Jr. Drive.
Okay.
But back then it was West Broad Street. Martin Luther King is nothing like it was, say, in 1960, 61, 62. But I was in that shooting pool and he came in and he asked everybody, attention.
To clock?
So they came in and asked for our attention, and I'll never forget, I was getting ready to shoot the 8-ball in the corner and shoot the 9-ball in the side pocket and get paid. We were gambling. You would gamble. Whoever thought they were the best, I would bet you that you couldn't beat me. I'll run the 9 balls before you run it. And so that's what we were doing. We were betting. And I didn't want to hear nothing about what he was talking about. I was thinking about shooting that 8-ball and playing that 9-ball and getting paid. That was my number one objective.
How did he happen to be coming into the pool hall?
Well, they were going to have a mass rally at my church, St. Philip AME Church, that night. A big mass rally. Jose was organizing the town to come in to hear Dr. King. And And so he was carrying him around town, you know, just letting people see him so they would know that Dr. King really is in town, you know. I remember he coming over to me and he said, "What's your name?" I said, "What's your name?" He said, "I'm Martin Luther King." I said, "I'm Willie Bolden." He said, "I promise, just give me a few minutes and it'll be all over. I'll be gone. You get back to your 9-ball game." He said, "I like to play a little pool every now and then myself." You know, I said, "Okay." So I went over and sat down, and he made his little spiel, and he left. And,
What did he say?
well, he was talking about freedom. He was talking about segregation. He was talking about unemployment. He was talking about education. He was talking about how it is that we are in the pool room right here, and more likely you guys are betting one can beat the other, but the real bet ought to be downtown, because what you all are taking from one another is absolutely nothing compared to what they're taking from you downtown on Bay Street. And of course, you know, by that time, because I had already had that little confrontation, you know, I had to sit there kind of arrogantly, you know, like I wasn't listening, but I guess you are listening. So they left, and I went home to get ready to come out for the night, because I had a good day that day, man. My pockets looked like they had the mumps. I had so much money in it. So I was going to come out and have me a good time that night. And while I was home in my number 310 tub, didn't have no shower back then, thankfully. Had number 310 tub, that's the big one.
On what street?
On Anderson Street, right across from College Junior High.
Okay.
605, I'll never forget it. Right on the corner of Anderson and Burris Street. My house was the first one on the corner. And I was in there in the tub with my ivory soap. I always did like that ivory soap, because you never had to worry about trying to find it. Ivory soap, for whatever reason, floats, and it still floats today, right on top, you know. And I think I did that because when I was a kid, my mom used to bathe me with that ivory soap, and it was always right there for me to get to. So I was taking my bath, and while I was bathing, I was just thinking about some of the stuff that Dr. King had talked about. And I said, you know, he was right about what he was talking about. I said, I think I'll go down there and see what else so I could see and listen. I want to hear what else he has to say. But I wasn't going to walk. It would have been much closer for me to come out of my house, walk 1 block to West Broad Street, turn left, and go straight to my church. I did that as a kid, coming up, going to church. That's the way my mom and all that. I mean, it would have been much shorter. But I didn't want the boys. I didn't want my boys to see me going to church. And certainly didn't want them to see me going to see Dr. King. So I went 2 blocks over, West Broad, Montgomery. Then I went up Montgomery Street, and then down Charles Street to the church. When I got there, folk were hanging off the rack. St. Philip AME Church, the largest AME church in Savannah, even today. Balcony and all that. I mean, folk were everywhere. Man, where all these folk came from. So I just kind of nudged my way through and got in and laid back on the wall. And shortly after I got in there, Reverend Abernathy, who introduced him, Dr. King got up and started speaking. And I said, I thought Jose was tough. This man, I mean, I just looked around. I was just amazed at how he could just pick people up off those seats and keep him up there and then sit him down whenever he got ready. Just through his orator skills, you know, folk were just, I mean, up and down, up and down. Say, good gracious, this guy is tough. And I'm leaning back there, and all of a sudden, Carol, chill bumps would come on me. And I said to myself, I'll never forget it. I said, self, a man is not supposed to make another man feel the way this man is making me feel. I mean, chill bumps and all. And when he finished his speech, folk lined up around the wall to go shake his hand. And I started out the door and I said, oh, no, I got to go shake this man's hand. I got to. So I got in the line. It seemed like I wouldn't go, ever get up there. Place was hot, you know. I wanted to get out of there. But I stayed. And Carol, when I walked around to him, and I reached my hand out to shake his hand, he said, Willie, I'm so glad you came. And I must admit that did something to me. I said, because I know this man had met many people that day. How in the world could he remember little old Willie's name out of all the people that he met? And then when I shook his hand felt like cotton, you know. Didn't feel like no man's hand. I mean, hands just so soft. And I said, Lord have mercy. And something just went through me, you know, just went through me. So that was that experience that I had with him. I had no idea that a couple of weeks later that Jose would tell me that he called him and told him to have me come to Atlanta because he wanted to talk to me about working with he and SCLC. And that's how I got started in the civil rights movement out of Savannah.
So within how many weeks or months did you then go to SCLC?
It was just a week or two because they had back then, I'll never forget it, Jose gave me I found out later to be a flight check. They had this account with the airline where all you had to do was fill in your name and sign it and give it to the person at the airline, and then they would send SCLC, I guess, the bills. So I didn't have to go purchase no ticket or anything. All I did was took that flight check that Jose gave me, and it said Savannah, Atlanta, and I came on to Atlanta.
So Hosea had known you left the door open at the Manger.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he didn't know at the time I did it, that I did it. No.
Okay, but
I
he
didn't even
found
tell
out.
him. Yeah, he found out.
And so when King came into the pool hall, he really knew of you in advance?
No, he didn't know me. Who knew me?
King.
No,
when he came to the pool room.
He didn't know me, and Jose, for all practical purposes, didn't know me because I never told Jose that I left the door open. It came to him later because I talked to some folk, and I said, yeah, I left the door open. But even Jose didn't know. I didn't tell anybody, even at work, that I was going to do it.
I see.
Because I didn't want anybody at work to know. If anybody had asked anybody at work that I worked with, they had to say they didn't know, which would have been the truth because I hadn't said anything. That was a conscious decision that I made because I found out that they were coming and what time they were going to come.
So here was a totally new opportunity.
New opportunity.
And so you came to Atlanta.
Came to Atlanta.
And then what happened? Where did you stay and what exactly did you
Well,
do?
when I first came to Atlanta, I lived at the Belmont Hotel on Auburn Avenue on the corner of Auburn and, what is that, Cortland? What is that one way going? No, Piedmont.
Piedmont.
Auburn and Piedmont. They put me up at the Belmont. SCLC put me up there. I stayed there. And the Belmont at that time was a pretty nice hotel.
That's the same thing as the Palomar that was just been
Well,
torn down?
that one that just been torn down, that was, then they renamed
Named
it.
it
I think it
back.
had several names after that.
Okay.
But it was the Belmont when I first got here.
Okay.
And then they had the club right across the street, and
The Royal Peacock?
the Peacock, and then they had Henry's Grill, and then they had the steakhouse right over on the other corner of Piedmont. It was the steakhouse. And then they down the street they had B.B. Beeman's restaurant. That was the restaurant on that strip at that time. That's the one that we used to hate to go eat with Dr. King, because it would take him an hour and a half, 2 hours to walk from Hilliard Street to Butler Street, where B.B. Beeman sat between Bell Street and Butler Street on Auburn Avenue, and it would take him 2 hours because people would stop and want to talk to him, and it didn't matter who they were, it didn't matter how dirty, how drunk, how anything, he was going to stop and talk to them if they came up to him. And I learned a lot from just watching him in terms of how to deal with people. He had really no respect of person. I mean, if you came up to him and you want to talk, he would talk to you. Some folk, Bernard Lee, I'll show you his picture. He was his traveling companion. He used to hate it at the airport because he walking down the corridor going to the airport, going to the airplane. Folk would want to stop and talk to him, and Bernard saying, Dr. King, we got to catch a plane. That's all right, Bernard. They're not going to leave. They'll be there when we get there.
You sound just like him.
They'll be there when we get there. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
So what were you doing at your
Well,
first days in Atlanta?
For the first year or so, my job was primarily going into cities where he was going to go, where some of the other leaders would go, to make sure that the town was ready for him, make sure that leaflets were passed out, make sure that we had a church, make sure that, just make sure that everything was in order when he got there. So when he got there, whoever was coming got there, all they had to do, we had someplace for them to stay if they're going to stay overnight. We had transportation. If it was an airport, we had transportation. They had to pick him up, transportation to get him back, make sure he had someplace to eat, just do all those kind of things, you know.
Who were you working with?
And, well, at that time, I was, who was that? Andy was there. Andy and, who was the other?
Had C.T. Vivian come in?
C.T. Vivian was there. Y.T. Walker was there. The guy from Tallapoosa, his name escapes me right now. As well as I know him. But, and of course, you know Reverend Abernathy was there. And then shortly after that, it wasn't long before Jose came, and then when Jose got there, I started working with Jose and for Jose. But pretty much doing the same identical thing. Except when Jose got there and he started organizing these direct action campaigns, then he would send me in to create the kind of trouble and turmoil and get folk fired up and get them ready to go to jail. Sometimes I'd take them to jail before they got there so they'd be used to it and that kind of thing. So
you also, in a sense, preached and talked at mass meetings.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. That was a part of it. Getting in there, organizing mass meetings so I could make sure that I talked about nonviolence and going through workshops, and I would choose certain people in the community to work with me who would help me with the nonviolent workshops, and we'd put on skits, did everything to get people ready.
How did you get into nonviolence?
Well, Dr. King gave us 2 books, the Holy Bible and Mahatma Gandhi, and they were mandatory reading. mandatory reading. And I went through some serious workshops on nonviolence because, to be honest with you, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to let nobody, like I said earlier, spit on me or slap me or hit me in any kind of way, and I not react to that. I just wasn't about nobody hitting on me, beating on me, period. But it was understood that that's what the movement was all about. And Dr. King, in every meeting, he always talked about nonviolence. I never known him to have a meeting where he didn't talk about nonviolence. Andy always talked about nonviolence. CT Vivian always talked about nonviolence. And then when we got together as a team, like for an example, they would send certain of us together, like they did in Philadelphia. And they sent
Philadelphia where?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
They
okay.
were having some turf war fights up there.
Okay.
And Dr. King was asked to come in and help them with the gang wars. So Dr. King sent what he called the Magnificent Seven. And that was Andy, me, J.T. Johnson, Jim Bevel, Henry Brown Lee, and one other. I'm not sure if it was Leon or Marset, but it was 7 of us that he sent there for the sole purpose of meeting with gangs and preachers, because the gangs were fighting against the preachers and the preachers were preaching and fighting against the gangs, but the turf wars were continually taking place. So we went there, and it took us about 3 weeks, three and a half, 4 weeks, and we finally got the preachers and the gangs sitting down at the table. Those persons who had what they thought was the expertise, like Andy could negotiate that eagle off that off that stand right there. I mean, that's just his style.
Talent.
Yeah, he knows how to do it. Me, I break it off. You know, and that Jose, we'll break it off, but Andy would fix it where it be just a smooth, you know. So we let Andy deal with the preachers and the leaders, and we dealt with the gangs because we knew how to deal with them. Now, how do we know how to deal with them? We had this boy named Big Lester with us.
Who?
Big Lester. He's dead now, but he was from Savannah.
What was his last name?
Hankerson.
Hankerson?
Big Lester Hankerson. And I say big, he was about 6'1", 6'2", weighed about 240, 250. Big boy. When he walked in the room, you knew Big Lester was in the room. But he was a corner boy, like all of us were in Savannah, and he knew how to shoot crap. Okay, dice. Yeah. And so we would go on the corner and get in the crap game with the crap shooters. And then Lester would end up winning all the money. So what do you do when you get all the money? Well, you get all the money, and then you get folks to talk. You say, now look, man, look. All this money I won, I'm going to give it back to you. But just listen to me for a minute. Listen to what we're talking about. Because you see, we know what's going on. You can see, we've been on the street. We know what's happening. And we would use whatever talents we had there. I would use my pool talent, for an example, because I was an excellent pool shooter. So I would use my talents in the pool room. And folks would say, man, you work with Dr. King, you shoot pool, man, you just pimping, man, you pimping. I said, no, Doc, I just know I know what it's all about. I've been out there. I've gone through what you're going through right now. But I found it to be much more satisfying on this side. Just try.
But Big Lester, how did he always win at crap?
Because he knew what to do with the dice.
manually, in
Manually.
talent.
Yeah, he was
Okay.
just talented.
Okay.
He just knew how to roll them. And it didn't matter if you were rolling them level or you were bumping them off the wall. It didn't matter. He just knew. He was good at it.
Okay.
He was good at it. So we used those talents to get into the, lack of a better word, the hood. Because you can communicate with people when you communicate on that level. And when they see that you have the talent, and your talent may be just a step above theirs, then that makes them look at you in a different light. Even though you're from out of town. They knew we were going to be leaving sooner or later. But we were able to get them to sit down at the table.
Okay. All right, so what city was next? When did Saint Augustine come in kind of early for you?
Well,
or was
yeah,
that much
Saint
later?
Augustine.
Saint Augustine was what year? 60?
Well, before Saint Augustine. Well, no, Saint Augustine was in 60. What was that? 64, I believe. No, 68.
Yeah, it was March 64.
Yeah, March.
The demonstrations.
Yeah,
around March of 64.
Yeah, and Dr. King sent all of us in there. Andy was in there. Jose was in there. Jim Bevel was in there. James Owen, J.T. Johnson, myself.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I just got back from there celebrating their 40th year of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine, and they have just erected a plaque down there with my name on it, Jose's name, Andy's name, as the leaders from SCLC who were there at that time organizing that city.
Mm-hmm.
St. Augustine was a tough city, and it was a tough movement. I know because for 19 days in a row, we went to the beach trying to integrate the beach. And for 19 days in a row, we were jumped on and beaten by the Klan. Every weekend, the Klan would import other Klansmen from as far away as Arkansas to come into St. Augustine for the sole purpose of beating on us when we would try to integrate the beaches, the hotels and motels. It was St. Augustine movement that really and truly, out of all the marches and demonstrations that I participated in, the one in St. Augustine proved to me how powerful nonviolence really was. Now, how did it do that?
Yeah.
I led 6 people out on a boardwalk in St. Augustine to a restaurant called the Santa Maria. It is still there. Mm-hmm. I ate there recently. And when they saw us coming, they locked the door. And we sang a freedom song, had a prayer, and we left. Now the walkway to get to the Santa Maria is as long as my driveway out there. That'll give you some picture of how long it is. From the street to the restaurant. And when the tide is out, there's nothing but oyster beds down on the bottom. And the posts, big posts that hold the boardwalk up, oysters have stuck all around there. Mind you now, if you were ever thrown over in there, you were just going to get cut to pieces. It was no way. I mean, you just going to get cut up bad. On our way back to the car, about midway that boardwalk, 3 of the largest white men I ever saw in my life confronted us on the boardwalk. I'm saying, I got these people here with me, I know one lady was about 60 years old. I said, if these folk throw us over there, that's going to be it. I mean, because every time you would move, you get cut. Okay? Now, how am I going to deal with this? As the leader of these people, 6 people with me. So I stopped, and they stopped. About as far as you and I are apart from each other right now, we stopped. And I'm standing there, and something in the back of my head is telling me, put your nonviolent tools to work. So I locked on eye to eye with the biggest one in that group. They had on these big muscle shirts, arms, all, necks. So I locked in on the biggest one in the group, eye to eye. He didn't blink. I didn't blink. He didn't blink. I didn't blink. Finally, I told them to stand right where you are.
Told who?
My group who was with me.
Okay.
I said, you all stay right here. And I walked up to him. And we were about this close together, face to face. He grit his teeth. I grit my teeth. He looked at me. I looked at him. He looked at me. I looked at him. He grit his teeth. I grit my teeth. Now, what he didn't know was this. I was so scared. You know, you've seen ladies who stand back in their legs, on their legs, and lock them. I stood back in my knees and just locked them, because had I not locked my knees, I would have been shaking all over the place. Huh? I mean, that's how scared I was. I was scared. Finally, it seemed like it was forever. And finally, he moved to one side and he said, let these niggas get off this boardwalk. Get off this boardwalk right now. And I looked at him while he was moving over, and I said, come on, y'all. Let's go. They act like they would move kind of slow. I said, come on, y'all. And we went on, because we parked the car down on the street, right in front of the place, illegally. Because we knew they were going to lock the doors. Because that was not the first time we had been there. Mm-hmm. And we got in the car and went on back to the church. And I really didn't stop. And where was I?
You were talking about, so you all were able to retreat from that restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Get back,
in the car, went back to the church. And it wasn't until after we got back to the church that really perspiration just started. I mean, I just started sweating profusely. Just the thought, as I told the group and the other folk about what had just happened to us, you know, that's when it really, and when I started thinking about, you know, those folk could have really thrown us over. And if they had, we would have been cut to pieces.
So what was it that made him, in a sense, back off or
I
not
have no
attack you?
idea other than the fact that I think he felt like, you know, this guy's got to be crazy. Because he was about, 6, all of them were about, it wasn't but 3 of them, but all of them about 6 feet. And, you know, I back during those days, I was about maybe 180, 190. You know, I was built pretty solid too, but not compared to those guys. And I think the fact that I just stared him down, and I never opened my mouth to him. Never opened my mouth. I just looked him straight in the eye. And I think that probably had more to do with him turning back than anything else. The fact that here was a black man looking him straight in the eye and not backing down.
You were engaging him as an equal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When he grit his teeth, I grit my teeth. He didn't blink, I didn't blink. I wanted to blink, But that's all we did, just looked at each other. And I never opened my mouth. And finally, when he backed up and said, let these niggas off of here. And at that moment, I turned and said, come on, y'all, let's go back to the church.
Okay, there's now, as I understand, there was a part in which there were students that were being asked to give up their weapons, and that you were the one that coaxed them out of their weapons.
What happened was we were at the church and we were going to have a march that night. And like we always do, have those pep rallies, you know, before we get ready to march and before the main speaker comes on. And I think that was the night Jose was going to speak. We went through, we got some buckets, and we said, now, remember, this is a nonviolent march. We believe in nonviolence. So we don't want anybody to carry anything that could be Yeah, we wanted to make sure that nobody had anything in their possession that would or could be construed as a weapon. So we had everybody to go through their pockets, go through their purses. Ladies, your fingernail files, your emery boards, anything with a sharp point on it, pen, pencil, you know, we want to put it in these buckets. Guys, you got a switchblade, and you know, you say that to kind of get a little joke, little fun in it. But if you got a switchblade, if you got a sawed-off shotgun, if you got a pistol, if you got a .357 Magnum, whatever it is, we want to put it in here. When you come back to the church, then you can come back. We're going to have somebody stay here and watch everything, so you can come back and then you can get it. And it was amazing, some of the things that we got. We didn't get any sawed-off shotguns, but we certainly got pistols and screwdrivers and switchblades, razor blade box cutters. You'd be surprised what people are walking around in the street with, even today. And they were certainly doing it then. But that's how we got those things up.
Okay. I know at some point people from the outside, from the Northeast, were invited to come and join the protesters and the demonstrations in Saint Augustine, and Mary Peabody,
Yeah,
the governor's mother. Did you have any assessment of the value of that, what had happened, and how that had worked out?
I'm sure it helped. Anytime you have the governor of a state's wife in the midst of the kind of turmoil that was taking place there, then naturally the media is going to be there, and the exposure that we got from them being in there was tremendous. The house that Dr. King was staying in was shot up, and it belonged to a Caucasian family, and they allowed him to stay in there while they were away. And of course the Ku Klux Klan shot the house up. The hotel owner, the Munson Hotel, which is now the Hilton Hotel in Saint Augustine, the Munson Hotel was finally torn down, but the picture went around the world with this man running around the pool because J.T. Johnson and others were in the pool swimming, and he didn't want them in there, and he was running around with acid, pouring acid in the pool. He didn't have sense enough to know that the chlorophyll in the water was so strong that all it would do was dilute the acid that he poured in there. But just the idea of him doing that in the restaurant, you know, he got locked up. Dr. King got locked up trying to get a room in the hotel. People were locked up trying to get into the restaurant, and then this idiot running around throwing acid in the pool trying to harm folk who were swimming was certainly something to be not to be desired. But Saint Augustine movement, and what most people don't understand, I believe, even today, I believe even folk who were involved in the movement, I think what they don't realize is that Birmingham, Alabama put the Civil Rights Bill on the president's desk. No question about that.
Birmingham.
The Birmingham movement put the Civil Rights Bill on the desk of the United States president. But it was the Saint Augustine movement that got him to sign it. See the correlation? See, the Civil Rights Bill had been up on the president's desk for a long time. But it wasn't until the Civil Rights movement took hold in Saint Augustine that he signed it.
Okay.
That's
The
how
added pressure.
That added pressure, and that's how powerful and the Saint Augustine movement really was, because it was hell in St. Augustine. Could you imagine for 19, 20, 25, 30 days straight getting whipped by the Ku Klux Klan, and they were importing them in from everywhere for the sole purpose of beating us up? And they did that every day and every weekend.
So how
Hoss
did you take?
Manusi in his group. Hoss Manusi, he was the sheriff. And we call him Hoss Manusi and his posse. Every weekend, every day, they would come out for the sole purpose of beating us up.
So how did you bear that?
Well, I mean, you just do what you had to do.
You got beaten up every day?
Oh yeah, I got beat. C.T. Vivian almost got drowned. I pulled C.T. Vivian out of the beach, out of the waters. I was looking at a picture the other day with me, C.T. and Fred Shellsworth with our bathing suits on out at the beach in St. Augustine. But you know, you just did what you had to do. You pray, because you never knew what was going to happen. I didn't worry too much about the water because I could swim. But there were a lot of people who went out there who couldn't swim. I used to like to hear Reverend Shellsworth tell the story about a march he led out there, and the Klan came out, and Fred says that the Lord just gave him a vision, because he wasn't a swimmer either. And as the Klan would move out, then he would move back. He would tell the folk, back up. And they'd back up, and the water finally got over their knees, and they would come a little further. He'd say, back up. And they'd go out, and then the water got around their waist, and he would tell everybody, now when I move, y'all move. And when the water got out around chest high, he knew they weren't going to be able to do anything with him. He said, now let's go. And they went around the side and ran out. I like to hear Fred talk about that. He outsmarted him. He said, because I know I couldn't swim.
Tell me something about that midnight march to Lincolnville. Andy Young was kind of pushed into leading that march.
Well, it was in St. Augustine. That was down to the slave market.
Okay.
And that slave market is still there. I saw it last year and this year because I was down just recently. What they have done is taken the stump out. In St. Augustine, in downtown St. Augustine, the slave market is there, and in the middle of it, when we were there, they had a tall stump, about as high as this table. And this, what it was used for during slavery was put the slaves on top of it, and master would come and check out the slave to see how much the slave, that particular slave, would be worth. Well, we had a meeting at the church, and we all decided that, and Andy spoke, that we were going to march downtown to the slave market. And the idea was to have a couple of marches around the slave market, have prayer, and then leave. Well, when we got down there, before we got there, the state patrol commander came and brought us to a halt and said, Reverend Young, I need to speak with you a moment. And would you step here a minute? And we were always taught, never go anywhere by yourself. So me and 2 or 3 other people went with Andy over to the state where the commander pulled him over to the side, and he said, look, he said, man, there's so many people downtown, and if y'all go downtown today, I'm not so sure that we have enough troops to keep anybody from getting hurt. It's just impossible for us to protect you all with all those people downtown. We found out later there were about 1,500 angry whites down there waiting on us to come to the slave market for the sole purpose of getting on us, beating us up. So he said, I suggest that you don't go downtown tonight. This was at night. And Andy said, well, that's not my decision to make. I have to carry it back to the people, and then they make the decision. And I'll let you know. So we came back, and we made a huge, Andy had everybody make a huge circle. And he and I stood right there in the middle of the circle. And Andy said, the commander of the state patrol has just advised me and the group that there are a lot of angry white people downtown. And he suggests that we don't go because they don't believe they would be able to protect us. So,
Somebody coming in.
So he said, the commander of the state patrol has said if we go downtown, he can't guarantee any protection. Somebody could get hurt, somebody could get killed. He just doesn't have enough troops to protect us. But I'm going to tell you this. If we don't go downtown tonight, even though it's dangerous, if we don't go, I might as well call Dr. King and tell him that the folk in Saint Augustine are really not about being free. And when they stand up in church and sing the song, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free, it's just words. They really don't mean it. And we might as well pack up our bags and go on back to Atlanta. He said, but now, on the other hand, if you really meant what you said at the church, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. If you really mean it, if you really, truly meant what you said, then make a circle around Bolden and myself. And those folk grab hands, each other's hand, and commence walking in. You could just see a sea of folk. We must have had 350, 400 people. And they just came around, and tears started coming out of Andy's eyes. Not because he was afraid, but because he saw where those folk really and truly meant to be free. We marched downtown to the slave market. Told the commander, we're on our way downtown. Do what you can. But we're on our way downtown. When we got to the entrance of the slave market, 4 big white boys, they were doing everything. They were hitting chains on the ground, hitting lead pipes together, pumping shotgun, shaking, whatever, hitting on, had baseball bats, and whatever they could do to scare us, they were making that noise. We could hear, the closer we got, we could hear all that stuff. But we went on anyhow. And when we got there, we stood there at the entrance of the slave market. And one of the guys standing there, one of the white guys, reached in his back pocket and brought out a slapjack. A slapjack is a flat piece of leather with some metal sewn in between it. Hit Andy in the mouth. Bam! Knocked him down. Bam. We didn't say one word. I reached down, hit Andy up, a little dizzy. Guy hit Andy again, knocked him down to the ground. The guy on the right side of this guy came from behind his back with a long stick about yay big in diameter. He was getting ready to hit Andy across the head. I fell on top of Andy and put his head in my stomach the way we were trained. Took my hand and locked up my head, and pulled myself up in the fetal position. And the guy commenced hitting me on my hand, because what he wanted me to do was to break my grip so he could hit me in the head. But the Lord wouldn't let my grip come loose. They were locked in. So he just hit me all on my arm, my back, and everything. Leg, foot, feet, whatever he could hit on, that's what he did. And finally he quit.
What made him quit?
I guess he got
just got
tired.
tired.
I guess. I don't know what made him quit. I was glad he did. I'll tell you that. And I rolled over and I asked Andy a very stupid question. I said, "You doing all right?" That was a very stupid question. Man, he got hit in the mouth twice with a flapjack. But that's the only thing I could think of to ask him. You know, "Are you doing all right, Andy?" Look at me. I don't know whether he said okay or what. I think he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm okay." So we stood up. And again, after we stood up, we didn't say a mumbling word. They just moved out of the way. We marched around the slave market, knelt the last time we went around, had a word of prayer, and went on back to the church. Now, I always tell that story because it's very powerful in terms of nonviolence. Remember I said Andy was hit twice in the mouth with a flapjack? Not one drop of blood ever fell from his mouth. Not 1 millimeter of swelling came to his lips. Today, this coming December the 7th, I'll be 68 years old. I still play golf and all that stuff, and my hands, all that beating I took. Ordinarily, you would think that my fingers would have been broken, my hand would have been broken, my back, my legs, all would have been messed up. No. That's when I knew that the Saint Augustine movement validated to me that nonviolence is the most powerfulest tool one can use. I know now why Gandhi won. I know why he won. He had the Bible and his belief in nonviolence.
Are you praying while you're being beaten?
No. You're not thinking about praying. You pray before you get beat. Because while you get beat, your mind and everything is get set on survival. You're in a survival mode. Mm-hmm. So you have to pray before you get there. Mm-hmm. You have to ask God to protect you while you're on your way, mm-hmm. and protect you when you get there. Protect you through all hurt, harm, and danger. You know, help me to do and say and the right thing. Help me to recall the training that I've been given, so when the circumstance called for it, I'll be able to pull it and operate without even thinking about it, because you're in a survival mode. And then when you get back, you don't forget to stop and thank him for bringing you through it, because you know that's the only one who brought you through. Mama didn't bring you through it. Daddy didn't bring you through it. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't bring you through it. Andy didn't bring you through it. Rab Abernathy didn't bring the only person brought you through what you just went through was Jesus. Mm-hmm. So you have to stop and thank him, because you know you're going to have another shot. Right. So you're going to have to ask him to protect you again.
Okay, so were you involved in Birmingham?
I was not involved in Birmingham.
Okay.
I think the next movement I was involved in would be Marks, Mississippi.
Marks, Mississippi.
Marks, Mississippi was the movement where the nation saw Dr. King cry. It was the poorest nation, the poorest city in the nation.
Where is Marks?
Marks, Mississippi is right out of side of, not too far from Grenada, Mississippi, going up in the Delta.
Why Marks?
When we got there, it's not a very big city, but when we got there, we saw little boys and girls, teenagers walking around with their teeth literally falling falling out of their heads because of malnutrition and poor health care. It was nothing to see babies walking around with their stomachs
Distended.
pushed out like they're pregnant, but they're literally dying from malnutrition. Dr. King saw this and cried. Well, it was right during the time, shortly after that, he was killed, because that's when we started organizing the Poor People's Campaign to go to Washington, D.C. in 1968.
So Marx comes in 68.
Yeah.
But you had Selma before then, right?
Selma was in 65.
65, yeah.
But we're talking about the Poor People's Campaign.
Oh, okay. I wasn't there yet.
Yeah, okay.
I wanted to hear the Selma Montgomery story. I know you were involved in that too.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm 3 years ahead.
Uh-huh.
Okay, let me back up to Selma March. Then Dr. King sent us in to organize Selma for the Voting Rights Act. Of course, again, it was like it was every place else, taxation without representation. And we went in and started organizing people for voter registration. I remember one incident where we led some people down to the courthouse. C.T. Vivian, myself, I believe J.T. was with us. And when we got to the courthouse, the sheriff came out and knocked C.T. Vivian off the steps, knocked him down the steps, because we refused to leave until we were able to get these folk registered. And of course we started organizing, because it got so bad, it was decided that we would organize a march from Selma to Montgomery. We would take it to Governor Wallace. And that's how the march from Selma to Montgomery got into being.
Tell me about Marion, though, in Perry
Marion,
County.
Alabama, that's the night Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. Dr. King was supposed to go there to speak but developed laryngitis, and he couldn't go. So he sent me, Big Lester, Trash, whose name is Henry Brownlee, but we call him Trash. He's from Savannah. Jimmy Lee Wells, and it was a white girl who went with us. I can't ever think of who she was, and all of the people who was with us right then, Lester's dead. Jimmy Wells can't think of her. He's a sheriff now. Fulton County Marshal. He's the chief Fulton County Marshal here in the city of Atlanta. And Brownlee is still, he went back to Savannah. But anyway, we went there and we had a meeting that night at church. And
Which church?
I can't even think of the name of the church.
Okay. Wasn't Zion
and
Chapel Methodist Church?
That sounded like it might have been it.
Okay.
It wasn't far from downtown.
Okay.
It wasn't far from downtown. And I spoke that night, and we decided that we were going to march down to the courthouse, because we always would march to the courthouses, and then we'd come back to the church and then have our dismissal. Well, the news media was there, the national press was there, the local press was there, because they thought Dr. King was coming, because he was scheduled to be there that night. And so we were going to march downtown, and the local sheriff and his folk decided that we were not going to march. So when we came out of church, they just jumped on us. And not only did they jump on us, but they jumped on the news media, especially the out-of-town news media, because they didn't want them feminine. And as I was coming down the steps, one of them jacked me up behind my overhaul and carried me over to the sheriff, jacked me up behind my back on my overhaul and behind my head, and took me over to the sheriff, And the sheriff said, what's your name, boy? And when I got ready to tell him my name, he stuck his pistol in my mouth and cocked the trigger back and said, if you breathe, nigga, I'll blow your so-and-so brains out. Just breathe. And I just held my breath. It seemed like that was forever. And finally he snatched it out, and that's why I have these caps right here, because the aim on top of the pistol broke my teeth off, and my tooth off, and then he just hit me upside the head, knocked a hole in my head, and said, lock this nigga up, and see if this Martin Luther Coon can come get him. That's what they were referring to Dr. King as Martin Luther Coon. And as they were taking me to the jail, those folk were just, the sheriff and I was just beating folk. And all the way to the jail, I could see blood on the ground. Even in the jail, folk they'd already put in jail, I could see the blood going up steps when they were taking us and putting us in jail. And then later on, we heard a shot. Well, we heard shots. We didn't know what had happened, but then we found out later that's when Jimmy Lee Jackson had been killed, trying to protect his mom. So that was the Marion situation. Of course, you know, from there we started organizing to go to Montgomery. And
the Jimmy Lee Jackson shooting must have really galvanized it.
Oh yeah. Well, you see, because we had a couple of killings. You know, we had the Jimmy Lee Jackson, of course, but then we had the rabbi who was killed coming from the restaurant, one of the black restaurants one night. He was killed and the people with him beaten. So.
Was this in Marion or
no,
Selma?
No, this was in Selma.
Okay.
So, you know, folk were still, you know, up in arms about that.
Mm-hmm.
But then the thing that really galvanized the Selma was that first march across the bridge when we got beat. Mm-hmm. And we had to turn around and come back. That's when people start coming from all over the world to Selma. And of course, you know, the second march, we went all the way to Montgomery. But even during that period of time, Viola LaRusso was killed on the highway as we were going, because she was transporting folk from Selma to Montgomery. And she got killed on Highway 80. And all of that was during that period of the march from Selma to Montgomery.
Okay. As I understand it, SNCC and SCLC were in Selma.
Oh, yeah.
And meeting together and planning.
Matter of fact, I worked with Willie Ricks even before Selma. I worked with Willie Ricks in Americus, Georgia.
Okay.
Because I was there for SCLC organizing Americus, Georgia. And that's when Willie Ricks and I really first started working together. He was with SNCC, I was with SCLC. But we were always able to work together. And he's a very dear friend of mine, even today.
Oh, okay. So, I wanted to know what your opinion was then about the second attempt at marching, once they had been turned back on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and the plan to march again, and it had been agreed in advance that they would only go just so far and then turn back. What was your involvement, or what was your assessment of that plan?
I've heard that, but Dr. King knows never made any agreement to march so far. Our position was we were going to Selma. We knew, I think, if my memory serves me correct, it's about 50 miles, I believe, somewhere between 40 and 50 miles. And how many days it would take, we were going to go all the way to Selma. This stuff about...
You mean to Montgomery? I
mean to Montgomery. From Selma to Montgomery, about 50 miles. Somewhere between 40 and 50 miles. I've never heard any discussion from SCLC about we were going to only go so far and then turn back. Because we had already organized spotters to go ahead, to identify places where we were going to stop and spend the night, to get homes for those who needed homes, shelter for those who would not be able to withstand staying outside, and that kind of thing, medical attention, portable toilets, have those all set up, because we had it planned, you know, you go so many miles each day till we get there. But and I never sat in a meeting where it said we were going to go so many miles and then turn around and come back to Selma.
But I meant, I guess toward the end of the bridge. How did you feel, though, when the group turned back to the church on that second attempt?
No, on the first attempt, we were beaten back.
Right.
On the second attempt, we went all the way.
Okay.
See, we were beaten the first time. That's when the sheriff and the state patrol and I'm trying to think of his name right now. The sheriff from Selma.
Clark.
Yeah, Clark. That's when he stood there and said, you know, you all turn back. We're not going to allow you to use this highway. And we knelt down and prayed and got back up and said, we're going on. And then that's when they jumped on us with the horses and billy clubs and tear gas, and they beat us back that time. That was the first time. But by the time we organized that second march, because by the time we organized the second march, people from all over the world was in Selma.
Okay.
And then that's when we went on. We didn't turn back after that.
Okay.
Yeah, but we were whipped back the first time. I mean, we just had no choice. They were just trampling folk with horses and knocking them down the side of the bridge, hitting folk in the head. I mean, they really, that's why we call it Bloody Sunday. Because blood was all over everywhere.
Okay. All right. Well, you know, there's a lot in the literature, though. There's a lot in the literature about the injunction after that Pettus Bridge massacre, and SNCC coming in this time when before they had been reluctant, but with the massacre insisting that you got to go to Montgomery now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Everybody came in. NAACP, James Former with CORE, you know. Every organization that you could possibly think of, and Belafonte, I mean, Joan Baez, who was with us in Grenada, Mississippi during that crisis. I mean, folk just came in from all over everywhere. They said, oh no, you can't. And that's what got the 65 Voting Rights Act signed. Because Dr. King had already stopped by the president's office when he came back from receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, asking him to assist us in getting a Voting Rights Act. And the president said, Dr. King, you have me run out of time. There's no way in the world I'm going to get these southern governors and senators to help me or to support me on that. And by the way, Dr. King, you know, you're just coming back from a mountaintop experience, receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. You know, why don't you cool off, you know? And Dr. King said, you're absolutely right. I've just finished a mountaintop experience, but I'm on my way back to the valley. I'm going back and I'm going to get my people. And Mr. President, with or without your help, we're going to get a Voting Rights Act. And that's when we came back and Dr. King said, we're going to Selma. And Selma, that same president that told Dr. King, no, I couldn't help you. I can't help you, signed the 65 Voting Rights Act and handed the pen that he signed it with to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Were you there at the signing?
No, I wish I could have been there. I would have given anything to have been there, but no, I wasn't there.
So what did you do after Selma?
I think after Selma, that's when I went to Mississippi, to Grenada. And then we had a movement in Grenada.
What kind of a movement?
It was voter registration, because by that time, you know, everything was pretty much voter registration, job related, and education, and housing.
Mm-hmm.
Because we knew we were leading up to the Poor People's Campaign.
Okay.
And then I left Grenada and went to Marks, Mississippi, and then that's when I was asked to head up the Mule Train. As a matter of fact, I have a picture here.
Okay. Let's see if I can get a picture of that.
I have a picture here. This is me on a horse that was given to me by a white guy with the saddle and everything on it.
Uh-huh.
And as you can see, the wagons behind.
Uh-huh.
And I was leading them through, it doesn't say which little town I was, Tuscaloosa, Mule Train. I was leading it into Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Okay, so you had left Marks.
Yeah, we had left Marks. We were on the way to Washington. And over here, we're in Birmingham, because here's the A.G. Gaston Motel.
Oh, okay.
In Gaston, Alabama. And this was a confrontation with the Alabama State Patrol and local officers in Birmingham, Alabama, and that's me right there in the middle, conversing with the police officers.
That's you?
Mm-hmm.
That's you, huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was a young man then, had a lot of hair, and look at it, it was black too. It was black.
Okay.
But we took that mule train from Marks, Mississippi to Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I think the record said we left on May the 13th, and we arrived in Washington, I think it was June the 27th or June 28th, I believe it says.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the whole history of, written by a very dear friend of mine, Roland L. Freeman.
Uh-huh.
The Mule Train, A Journey of Hope Remembered.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what was it like getting into Washington for the Poor People's Campaign?
It was a relief, but it also was a sense of accomplishment. Could you imagine in 1968 having 130 to 150 people on mule-drawn wagons traveling from Marks to Washington, D.C.?
Mm-hmm.
The responsibility of not only the people, but responsibility for the mules to make sure that they were fed and properly cared for, because you knew that the Humane Society, which they did, they came in on us a couple of times just to see how the mules were being treated. But we made sure, because if they weren't, then they were going to stop us from doing it, saying we were cruelty to animals. So
Too bad there's not a humane society like that for human beings.
Isn't it though? Isn't it though? But we made sure that we had the proper hay, the proper oats, the proper shoes. Their shoes were checked every day. They were brushed down and washed every evening. As a matter of fact, the mules were sometimes fed better than some of the humans. Mm-hmm. You know. But
did you care for the mules at all?
No. I had somebody do that. There was no way I could do it. First of all, I didn't know how to do it. But I made sure we had somebody on there who did know how. Mm-hmm. My job was, and that's why they call me the wagon master. My job was just to oversee everything, just to make sure that everything went properly. We came through Mississippi with minor hitches. We came through Alabama with minor hitches, and we only really ran into trouble when we got to my home state of Georgia, in Tallapoosa. In Tallapoosa, Georgia, at that time, we had a kindergarten dropout as governor, Lester Maddox. I call him a kindergarten dropout. And he ordered that we be arrested, that we were not going to use Highway 20 coming out of Alabama into Atlanta. And I said, Mr. Governor, we've come through Mississippi, we've come through Alabama, and we're going through Georgia. You do what you got to do, because I'm going to do what I got to do. And of course they locked me up in Tallapoosa. And when they did, the folk took the wagons, the mules, and everything and carried them down to the jail and said, we're not leaving until you let our leader out of there. So finally some negotiations began to take place between me and the governor's staff and the other leaders of the Mule Train. And they finally decided to block off one side of 20 and allow us to travel coming into Atlanta. And we did. We arrived in Atlanta. We all assembled at West Hunter. West Hunter Baptist Church was then right on the corner of Hunter and Chestnut. It was
Brawley.
Chestnut, but it's James P. Brawley now. But we stopped there, and that's where they fed us and took care of us. And then we broke everything down, broke the wagons down, made arrangements for the mules to be transported from Atlanta to Virginia, just on this side of Washington. And then we reassembled the wagons, the mules, and all of the people, and then we went across the bridge into Washington, D.C. And that was a beautiful sight.
It's a mammoth operation.
It was. It was.
And so what did you see? You said it was a beautiful
Oh,
sight.
when I rode that horse across that bridge, some of the folk were saying, you remember the old cowboy picture, what was it, get 'em up, move 'em out, rawhide.
Okay.
I said, get 'em up, move 'em out. And we trot on in to Washington, D.C., to Resurrection City. And that was probably it was one of the greatest moments of my life in the civil rights movement, because that was not an easy task. It took us almost 50-some days to do it. We slept in the rain, we slept in the cold. Any kind of adverse action, weather you could have, we had it. But the people didn't complain.
How many people did you have?
We had between 130 and 150.
Okay.
Men, women, boys, and girls.
Okay.
Even in this book, we have, now this guy right here, he was my shoe man. He was my horse
Why don't you
man.
bring that in a little bit closer to
Okay.
the camera?
Okay. Jesse Franklin.
Wait a minute. And then shove it straight so I
Yeah.
can get it.
He was the one who made sure that the mules were
Which one?
the one in the middle.
Okay.
That's Mr. Franklin.
Uh-huh.
He was the one who made sure that the mules were shoed and shoed properly,
Uh-huh.
that they were washed down
Uh-huh.
and fed. He had a little crew that worked with him.
Uh-huh.
And then he gave me a report every night. And during the day, if anything got wrong, anything went wrong, he would also let me know.
Mm-hmm.
He was really, you can see how long that wagon train is. Here we are coming down here, a gravel road in Mississippi. Then it said this was in mid-May of 1968.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the sign right there was on there, don't laugh, Jesus was a poor man. They had all kinds. This lady right here,
Now
Bertha Johnson.
hold that up to the camera.
Bertha Johnson,
Uh-huh.
she brought her entire family,
Bertha
husband
Johnson.
and children, all four. I think she had 4 children.
Okay.
She was sort of like one of my assistants. She made sure my schedule, made sure I got where I was supposed to be every day.
Mm-hmm.
She met with me every morning, and she was the last person I met with every night.
Mm-hmm.
She was invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am giving a pep talk to some young
Okay.
people,
Straighten it up just a little
keeping
bit.
them.
That's you.
That's me right there. hmm
Okay.
Joan Cashin and her husband John Cashin. He was a doctor. He was the one who provided all of the mules and the wagons for the Mule Train.
Hmm.
And she was the one who told me, and he too, that I needed to. Here's Andy, between two of the mules. That was in Marks, Mississippi.
Oh, okay.
Reverend Andy Young, a senior member of the SCLC staff, helping organize the mules. Now that's a good one there. You can see how
I've seen that picture. That's a very famous
train
picture, isn't it?
And here's a man chopping cotton there on the side.
Uh-huh. I've seen that picture before.
And that sign over there, which is better, send a man to the moon or feed him on earth? Everybody got to work and a right to eat.
So what happened when you got to Washington?
Oh,
And to
well,
Resurrection City? Tell me the story of Resurrection City.
well, when we got to Washington, we rode in, and of course the people were there to greet us, and they were clapping and glad to see us because they knew we were on the road on the way there. And the people just started mingling, living in, getting in their shanties. They had some places for them. And this is when we got to Alexandria, Virginia on June 19th.
Okay.
And we see the mule. See how long that mule train is?
Uh-huh.
And people came out to meet us, and we were going across the George Washington. I think that was George Washington Parkway.
Uh-huh.
And then here it is, moving on into the Capitol. Here we are here. See, people just came out to meet us.
Uh-huh.
And then this is it, where the shanties were built, living quarters,
Uh-huh.
and people were assigned, not so much assigned, but given various tents according to the size of their families.
Okay.
And that was Resurrection City on the National Mall. And here's a better and closer look at it.
Okay. How long were you all on the mall?
You know what? I don't remember. It wasn't. I'm really not sure.
Uh-huh. So what was the outcome of that, and how did you feel about it?
Oh, I felt real good about it. You see all these folk here. They say 50,000 Solidarity Day participants. But if we didn't have 200,000, we didn't have. But you know how they count.
Right.
We didn't have 10.
Uh-huh.
I thought that the whole march and what we came there for was beneficial. Remember, we got a housing bill out of that.
Okay.
We got a employment bill out of that, and all of that was a part of the '68 Poor People's Campaign. Fair housing, education, jobs. That was because we already had the right to vote. So those were the main things that we were there for.
Okay.
And all of those things passed Congress and signed by the president. So naturally we think that it was beneficial.
Right. So how
I
do you...
was glad to be a part of it.
Yeah. How do you feel now? In hindsight, we're looking back at the movement, what happened in the 60s. You just mentioned the accomplishments that came out of the Poor People's Campaign. Where are we now?
Well, sometimes I think we're going back, and then sometimes I don't. When I look at the young African Americans who are in positions of leadership and influence, I think sometimes they use their leadership and influence against black people. And I hate to say it, but I gotta say it, worse than white folks did. And I think it's because they don't really understand or really know how they got where they are. They think they're there because of their education. What they don't realize is that African Americans have been educated all along. And we had PhDs who still had to go around to the back and get their food at the Greyhound bus station. They couldn't go inside. They had a PhD, but it didn't matter. They were black. So they had to go to the back. And instead of taking what they have been able to obtain on the shoulders of us who have put them where they are, they take the position that they're there. And I've even heard some say, I don't want to hear nothing about no civil rights movement. I mean, I've literally heard them say that. And that's sad. Because what they need to realize is this. We still have a Board of Education in the city of Atlanta with 9 members, 5 of them being black, or 6. But yet they have a white president of the Board of Education in a school system that is 95 to 97% black. And they think it's all right. But 40 years ago, when the role was reversed, it never would have happened. You would never have had that 40, 50 years ago. You have a school system not only 95, 98% black, but 95 to 96% of the students who are in school eat free lunch every day. That means that their mamas and daddies, if they're fortunate enough to have mamas and daddies living with them, are either unemployed or underemployed, which qualifies them for the free lunch program in the first place. The dropout rate in high school today is worse today than it was 40 years ago. We have a black mayor. We have a black president of the city council. We have a black fire chief. We have a black chief of police. But crime rate in the black community is worse today than it was under Jenkins, who was a white boy 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Why is that? So our priorities are all mixed up. So I don't know. I think maybe we have, and I say we, I'm talking about those of us who were involved in the civil rights movement, and I'm not talking about on the periphery. I'm talking about involved in the civil rights movement. I don't think we've done a good enough job educating and letting our kids know how and why they are where they are today. And as a result of that, they don't appreciate it. They can't appreciate it.
So, who should address that challenge now?
Well, those of us who are still around. I'll soon be 68 years old, but I still got a lot of energy left. I'm not senile yet. I think those of us who are still here, somehow or another, we're going to have to dig in. You know, we want to turn the mantle over to them and then just kind of sit back and say, well, you know, I've done all I can do. But you haven't done all you can do. Jesus called Moses at the age of 80 to lead the children out of Egypt. So age doesn't have anything to do with it. It's where your mind is, where your head is, where your heart is. And it is incumbent upon us, even when they don't want to hear it, we got to tell it to them. Because maybe what would happen to them is what happened to me. I wasn't interested in listening to Dr. King in the pool room about no white boy downtown taking this and taking that. I wasn't interested in that. So I very arrogantly sat over there, but something in the back of my mind, I was listening. And as a result of that, I ended up getting involved in the civil rights movement. So we got to say, even though they'll say, I don't want to hear it, get out of my face. I'm here because I went to this school, I went to that school, my grade point average was this, my grade point average was this. We got to say, but when you get through with all of that, you're still black. When you get through with your salutatorium and valedictorium and cum laude and old laude and all them other laudes, when you get through, you're still black. No matter what it is, you're still black. No matter how much influence you have, you're still black. A.G. Gasson had more money than the average black man or white man in Alabama, in the state of Alabama. But he was still black, and he had limitations with all the money and prestige that he had. In the black community, he had no limitations, but in that white world, he had it. You're the head of American Express, but you still got some limitations. We sit back and complain about Morris Brown College. We don't have no business complaining. What we should do, doesn't have anything to do with being Methodist. It's a black college, HBCU. So I don't care if you're Church of God, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, whatever it is. If that school is in trouble, we need to do what we can to help it. My little church down there in Cedartown, they don't even know where Morris Brown College is. But I told them, look, we got to send a check to Morris Brown. So we sent a check to Morris Brown. We got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do.
And the King legacy? What is it? What should it be?
Where should it be?
What is it?
Okay.
What should it be?
What is it? It's still hanging out there. Just like I have that King, that photograph up there, painting of Dr. King. It's still out there. I doubt it. Very few homes you won't find it. Mm-hmm. What it should be a motivator to us. And not just around January 15th or April 4th. Because King was about freedom every day. And we treat it like we treat Jesus. We go to church on Easter and Christmas, his birthday and his resurrection day. But the question is, what are you going to do in between? Because Jesus was about feeding the hungry, giving sight to the blind, helping the lame to walk, the dumb to talk. He did all of that in between his birth and his death. He did something with that dash. So what do we do with Dr. King? We got to do something between January 15, 1929 and April 4, 1968. What did he do that day? We got to take that dash in between there and make it work day in and day out, because that's what he did. And I hope that's what we would do. That's my feeling. He should be a living memorial every day of our lives. Because if he was here today, if Dr. King was here today, you know where we would be? We'd be in New Orleans. We'd be in New Orleans. And not only would we be there, we would have been there until something happens. Now it's getting close to election and everybody wants to run. I hear where they're trying to pull the Congressional Black Caucus, the NAACP, SCLC, PUSH, CORE, ministers, everybody want to get in there now. But what about 4 months ago, 5 months ago, when I understand they're going to have a march on April 1st across the bridge that stopped black folk from getting out of New Orleans during Katrina. Why wasn't we there the next day to say, these folk are coming across this bridge. They got to get out of here. We're going now after the fact. Still got over in the 9th ward where my daughter lived. Her house was destroyed. That's why she's back in Atlanta now. Thank God my grandbaby going to the same elementary school that my daughter went to, right around the corner. My son, who was a fireman in New Orleans, is now a fireman here at East Point. My daughter, who worked at Xavier University in the pharmacy department, is now working with the medical Department of State Medical Medicare program. But they had to back up and get out of there. And now folk are worried about the election. And from what I understand, from what the information I've gotten from Jesse Jackson's group, and I'm going by there today because I want to get some things in writing, because I talked about it last night at my fraternity meeting. It seems as if though right now, based on what they're saying and doing, it's going to be harder to register and vote than it was in 1960, before 1965. All of the different criteria that they are putting on the residents. My daughter, she said, look, I'm here, but you know, I would just say, Carol, I certainly am happy that you thought enough to come in to interview me and make me a part of this very historical moment. I hope I've given you some information that will be useful. My experiences are many, and I still have much that I have not talked about. But you have been able to pull out of me what you really needed for this segment, and I want you to know that I'm very grateful to you and the Historical Society for choosing me to be a part of this great, great program. Thank you very much.
Well, I thank you. Tremendous. It was a wonderful interview. Thank you.
Thank you.